We have Gurumurthy ji with us for the next session. I'll just introduce our moderator. So welcome to the second session at the Atmanirbhar Bharat Summit by Rishihood and Rashtram. For the session on the history and present context of Atmanirbharta by S. Gurumurthy ji, I introduce our moderator. Professor Kamlesh Misra ji is the founding Vice-Chancellor of Rishihood University. With an economics background, he did his PhD from Northeastern University, Boston, after which he taught at the University of Pittsburgh in the US, before home calling when he returned to India to serve at the Ministry of Finance. And then he has been involved in setting up several private higher education institutions. So Professor Misra, over to you for an engaging conversation with Gurumurthy ji.
Hey, thank you, Sahil. Thank you so much. And Namaskar, sir. Let me quickly first introduce the speaker for this session, who is with us already. Swaminathan Gurumurthy ji is a very well-known chartered accountant and a senior journalist. And he edits the Tamil political weekly called Thuglak. It's a very, very well-known weekly. He's also the co-convenor of the Swadeshi Jagaran Manch. Very, very well-known. I heard about Swadeshi Jagaran Manch first time in the city of Allahabad. There's a lot of activities happening there. He's also a member of the board of the Reserve Bank of India, and in addition to this, Gurumurthy is a regular writer and commentator on political and economic affairs in the country. He's also a very well-known corporate advisor. We at the university, we are very honored to also have him as the chairman of the Rishihood University Board of Advisors. And let me welcome you, sir, for this session. What I can do is, let me try and about half an hour where we want to pick on your thoughts on this whole concept of Atmanirbharta. India has always had the privilege of being one of those countries where trade flourished. And we had a history of good linkage with other countries, exported a lot of things. Has India historically been a country that has been a very self-reliant country? Is there a trace? Can we trace a little bit about how it was?
See, it's a very peculiar kind of misinformation as well as miscommunication about India, sourced in the colonial and left intellectualism, which did down the Atmanirbharta of India. If you look at it, what are all the kind of attention that India has had from the Western thinkers in the 17th and 18th centuries until about the middle of the 19th century. They were all in awe of the Indian civilization. Whether it is Mark Twain or Emerson, take anyone. They were all expecting India to deliver a message which no other civilization or country could. But everything changed somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. The reason are two. One, the virtual and physical conquest of India by the British. Till then, they were here, they were there, but they really won against all our indigenous rulers in the middle of the 19th century. And at that time, a very important development takes place. In the year 1853, Karl Marx wrote a couple of articles on New York Herald Tribune, in which he was an opponent of colonization, but he supported the colonization of India on the ground that the Indian civilization, Indian nation is a very peculiar nation, that it has a larger idea of nation, there is a larger idea of national infrastructure, the integration of the people, but there is something very, very semi-barbaric about the Indians because they worship cows and monkeys. Their economy is rooted in villages, and each village is a self-contained unit. And India has not changed for the last 2000 years. So they lead a semi-barbaric life, and their economy and society has to be destroyed to prepare them for revolution. And so the British are doing the right thing by destroying what one may think as something, a sad development, but it is also a pleasurable development. This was the twist that was given by Karl Marx that became very widespread. He didn't find fault with the economy of India, but he found fault with the culture of India, religion of India, and so he said the British are doing the right thing. Then Max Weber, towards the end of the 19th century, he theorized that the Western economies have developed more because of Protestant civilization, Protestant culture. And whosoever has followed Catholic culture have lagged behind because of the lack of individualism and enterprise, which was more in Protestant civilization than in Catholic civilization. He was right because he had studied them for 30 years to reach this conclusion. But he suddenly wrote a couple of books on the religion of India and China, where he felt these two countries can never come up because they believe in karma and rebirth. This karma and rebirth concept, he theorized as something which will work against individualism, individual liberty and enterprise. And so this will go to the root of economic development, and India and China will never develop. And this Marxian and Weber theories dominated the Indian discourse, Indian education system, Indian public administration. In fact, there are researchers to show if there were two great thinkers who influenced independent India before and after, it was these two people. So, India lost its Atmanirbharta. We may have lost our territory, we may have lost our political freedom, but we lost our Atmanirbharta in this 100 years. Between the middle of 19th century to the middle of 20th century when we attained freedom. India, which was a thought giver, became a thought taker. India, which was a contributor to global thoughts, became a consumer of global thoughts. Instead of exporting thoughts, it became importing thoughts. So when we got freedom, we thought we would come out of all this. But unfortunately, India became free. It did not become independent. So independence means that your capacity to think for yourself. Somebody comes out of jail, that doesn't mean he's an independent thinker. So India did not become independent, and it continued the old ways, and it discarded the past so much that these two thinkers kept on influencing India. And you may be surprised to know, in the year 1978, a question was put to one of the brightest economic advisors, well-known economic advisors, Professor Rashtram, who was an advisor to the government of India, a socialist thinker. He was asked, why is it that India, which is following the socialist policies, is not posting the same growth as the socialist countries? They are all growing faster. You are following the same policies. He said, whatever policies you may follow, you cannot post more than 3% growth rate or 4% growth rate because you can have only Hindu growth rate. 1978 was the breakpoint for India, and the World Bank president, Robert McNamara, took this quote and said, India is a country which will never survive on its own. He began begging aid for India. This was 1978. This was the lowest point of the Atmanirbharta of India at the global level. And it had its impact on Indian intellectualism, Indian economists, Indian administrators, Indian media, Indian politicians. Then a turn occurred in 1983. But this tsunami of intellectual oppression of India through this century of thought system, which made Indians feel that unless they give up their past, they cannot develop. This also became some kind of a global philosophy. In the year 1951, the United Nations issued an advisory to the underdeveloped nations, saying that if you want to develop, you have to give up your philosophy, your way of life, and unless you completely re-engineer yourself, you can never develop. This was the system of education and even development policies, which we said, your religion is wrong, your community is wrong, all that you believe is wrong, all that you are wrong. And so you have to become a new person, you have to become a new India, unconnected with the past. You have to forget all that you thought were great and see that you feel that they were very absolutely useless thing to in the present context. Something very different happens in 1983. When at the instance of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, Paul Byrock, one of the well-known economic historians, he produced a paper that in the economic picture of the world between 1750 and 1900, in 1750, China and India put together had almost 60% of global output. And India's share was about 24-25%, and China's share was about 34-35%. And America and England put together had only 2% at that time. And in 1900, the whole thing changes upside down. America and England put together go to 41% in these 150 years. India and China, with their share of 60%, come down to 8%. China 6.2%, India 1.8%. This is where the whole collapse occurred. On this basis, there was a discourse in America, in Western countries, that let us accept that in the 16th, 17th, and even early 18th centuries, 19th centuries, India had a much higher standard of living, or Asia had a much higher standard of living than us. This could not be tolerated by the West because French historians began driving this point. Because England was ruling India, they wanted to show that England brought us down for their politics. What happened? This led to the OECD countries instituting a research, Development Studies Institute, which rewrote the history, economic history of the world under Angus Madison. Angus Madison was perhaps the greatest economic historian who lived. And he proceeded on the assumption that Paul Byrock cannot be right. He came to the conclusion, not only he came to the conclusion Paul Byrock was right, between the first year of the first century of the new millennium to 14th century, India was the leading economic power of the world. And India and China became equal in the 15th century. In the 16th century, China overtook India. In the 17th century end, India overtook China, and both were overtaken by others in the 19th century. This is the confirmed economic history of the world, and this showed when Atmanirbharta was the dominant paradigm of India, India had achieved enormous development, and I can tell you 100 things. In 1934, the Bank of International Settlement came out with its annual report, in which it said between the 14th and 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, end of the 19th century, India had accumulated 16% of the world gold production. That means that was the export surplus of India. And it said between 1929 and 1934, India lost almost 50% of its gold reserves. And you can read the Greco-Egyptian economic history, where the Roman Parliament discusses that India is looting our gold through exports. And you can quote Marco Polo, who says the Indian ships were 3 times bigger than our ships. And they had 300 crews. And they built ships which were destined to last for 100 years. All this became forgotten because of the intellectual thrust which came from Karl Marx and Max Weber, which made India feel that Hinduism is India's problem because the Hindu rate of growth is brought about not by anything else except Hinduism. So Atmanirbharta made us feel small about our past. This is what Swami Vivekananda said. So this was the state under which India was being ruled and continued to be ruled. And unless this was corrected, there was no question of what you call as a self-reliant India, in the sense of Atmanirbharta is a much, much bigger and vaster and comprehensive concept. This is
okay. Can I, sir, ask you, take you to a little different trajectory now? And thank you for giving that brief history. It's you're certainly a walking encyclopedia on that. You know, in today's world that we live, which we call as a globalized world, and where a lot of economists feel that, you know, competitive advantage is the key to deciding what we are good at and what we are not. Is it possible from today going forward that we can become self-reliant in everything? Or you still feel that the concept of self-reliance in Indian context is being misunderstood by people?
Actually, the competitive advantage theory lost all its relevance because the original idea of competitive advantage was based on natural resources. Whether somebody is a landlocked country or a country with seaports and all that, these were all the ingredients of competitive advantage. Then competition became decided by not so much trade as by investments and technology. Which country produces the sharpest technology had competitive advantage. Which country is able to invest in other countries, that had the competitive advantage. So the competitive advantage theory was changing in paradigm. And I can take you to 2 situations where a complete shift has taken place and all of it has lost meaning. That's what I'm going to say. So, if you see the post-war world, it is the Cold War, which was a tussle between 2 ideological groups that was determining the whole economic, political, military architecture of the world. So, what happened in this? America, which thought that it could, through its military power, dominate the world, got into serious problem in Vietnam. At the same time, it got into serious problem on its gold being pledged to defend the dollar, which became the global currency. And in the early 1970s, it was a serious problem. So it had to work out a deal with China, brokered by Pakistan, by which Pakistan got a very important place in the American system. And to break the Cold War, to break the communist bloc, they had to bribe away China. This was the starting point of a new economic model that a free market can work with a Marxist polity. This is very important. A market economy cannot work with Marxist polity. And the American began working with it for political reasons. And after they broke the Civil War, Cold War, and broke the back of the communist regime and made market economy the model of the world, they did not attempt to make democracy the model of the world. Why did Amartya Sen got Nobel Prize? Amartya Sen got Nobel Prize because he said that market economy is facilitated by democracy. He compared the hunger in Kalahandi with the massive hunger death in China, which happened between 1957 and 1960. 4 crore people died of hunger. In fact, it is said it is almost close to 5 crore. The news did not come out. It was disclosed by Deng Xiaoping somewhere in 1979-80. But Amartya Sen said, if there is one hunger death in India, in Kalahandi, the parliament will stop. Food will be air flown. So he said, unless there is information passes only through democracy, so market economy can work with only democracy. This, the West completely suppressed and supported a Marxist government to work in market economy. And you know what happened? They also brought them in 2001 in WTO because the Americans and the Western MNCs, they could not get over the labor laws there. The kind of labor laws that China passed could not have been passed in any democracy. That is how China was promoted as a factory by the MNCs. And of course, China gained enormously. And you know, in the year 2016, the Western nations filed an affidavit in the WTO that China is not a market economy at all. How later? And the WTO declared last year that yes, China is not a market economy. China did not even have the guts to appeal against it because it said being in WTO is a presumption of being market economy. They could not prove they are in market economy, which virtually seals off, in my view, China's advantages under WTO, because any country can levy anti-dumping duties on China because their costs are not transparent. In the same way, America has taken a position that American national interest is more important than WTO. According to me, these two things have sealed the fate of the WTO. And that is why the Prime Minister of India has thought that this is time that we declared Atmanirbharta as the paradigm. Atmanirbharta has a context. It has its relevance today. Because the global system, which made India feel that the world is the core and India is only a contributory, has now become the reverse. India is the core and world is the contributory. This is how nations are organized. And so Atmanirbharta has completely U-turned the world. In a way, the post-World War world now stands on its head. That is why Henry Kissinger, who formulated the post-Cold War order, he said the world order has changed once and for all. So for a new world order, the manner in which India will have to prepare is Atmanirbharta model. And I will explain in 2-3 formulations how it is. At the global level, I am foreseeing an alignment of democracies. Because only a democracy can work with market economy. Just as China followed market economy with Marxist politics, we followed democratic politics with Marxist economics, the reverse of it. And that is why we had the bad of both worlds. Because democracy requires a huge investment of national resources. China did not have to invest because it was a dictatorship. The investment that India made in the last 70 years of democracy is going to pay a huge return, because according to Brookings Institution's study of last year, India is the only bright spot, silver lining or even gold lining among democratic countries, because all other democracies are in crisis. The Western liberal democracies extend only to 14% of world's population. Added India, it is 30% of world's population. Adding all democracies together, it is 46% of world's population. 54% of world's population is under autocracies. So the world is likely to get divided between democracies and autocracies because global market cannot work with autocracies, as been proved by China. So in this shift, the only major country which has a huge advantage. Now you talked about competitive advantage. The competitive advantage in future is going to be who is democratic. Only that country can work with market economy. India has all the qualifications for it because it is not only democracy, it has a huge educational infrastructure related abroad. You know, there are 2.5 crore Indians living abroad. Each one of them is relating to 10 people, means India has the most globalized or globally understanding mindset in terms of technology, in terms of education, in terms of relationship, in terms of travel, in terms of capacity to understand the multicultural of the world. India has a huge advantage. I don't think any other country has this kind of advantage, and India does not have a racial outlook because of this, its diversity. So I believe the advantage is shifting to India, and that is precisely why the Prime Minister has got on to the paradigm of Atmanirbharta.
Thank you, sir. We have just a few minutes left, and I definitely want to ask you one question more. What is the role do you foresee for citizens in general in promoting this concept of Atmanirbharta for India, which is being pushed by the government?
You see, in terms of economics, I feel the Western idea of financial economy's domination over real economy has ended. So, real economy will begin dominating or controlling or influencing financial economy. And India is not a highly financialized economy. It's a very big advantage because our bank debt to GDP is less than 50%. Whereas the bank debt to GDP is 3 times, 4 times in most of the Western countries. Even in China, it is 2.5 times. So, our real economic advantage is going to be a very important thing. Second, Eric Reinert, who protested against globalization and said production is the most important thing, financialization is less important, his theories will drive the Indian model because we have almost 60 million MSMEs, which no other country has. It has spread industrialization to the last area of India, and that is going to drive the domestic economic development, and that supplies 60% of our exports, almost 75% of our employment. The third thing is that the idea of nation will dominate more than the idea of the world. We will work with the world, but we will not be dominated by the world, and no country will lose. That was Trump's agenda, that globalism will not be the future, nationalism will be the future. That does not mean you reject globalism, but globalism will not be the dominant paradigm. And that is, if globalism is the dominant paradigm, you cannot have Atmanirbharta in economics, in geopolitics, even in intellectualism. And so globalism and nationalism working together with the nationalism dominating will be Atmanirbharta.
Thank you so much for wonderful insights on Atmanirbharta, and we really enjoyed your session, and we hope that in future we'll be able to hear more about your thoughts, and we believe that yes, nationalism is going to drive the world economy, and almost every country is moving in that direction. Thank you so much for.
Thank you, Kamlesh.
Thank you so much. Let me hand it over to Sahil, who is the general moderator today.
Thank you so much, Gurumurthy ji. Your depth of wisdom is always so inspiring. And thank you, Professor Misra, for this engaging conversation with him.